Hello, everyone. I want to start out today's episode with a story. This is a story that happened to me. So, picture this. We are sitting in a large banquet hall eating fried chicken. This is the end of the year swim meet banquet for my kids. All right, this happened a few years ago. And so we're eating dinner. There's probably about 100 kids on this big swim team eating dinner, moving on to dessert. And while we're doing this, the coaches are giving out different kinds of awards, right? The final two awards came up eventually. They were going to go to the swimmers, who had excelled in their races and who had just been the best sports and the kindest and the most helpful. No one knew who this was going to be. And it's kind of a big deal for this team. So when the coaches were up there and they started describing who was going to win these awards, I was completely blown away. Not because they picked my children as the winners. They're great swimmers. They just don't regularly win swimming awards like that. I was blown away for another reason, for their use of gender pronouns. Why was I so surprised? And to explain that, we kind of need to back up a little bit. So, for the months leading up to the banquet, I had been co-writing a book with a friend and fellow culture consultant, Dr. Tiffany Jana. Tiffany and I had known each other for a long time. And so Tiffany, when I first got to know them, identified using she, her pronouns. And then they came out as using they, them pronouns. So I had to get used to using they, them pronouns for Tiffany. And as I was talking about the book that I was writing, lots of people wanted to know more about it. Like, tell me more about your co-author. And so I ended up finding that I would have to contextualize talking about Tiffany by just saying something like, okay, yeah, Tiffany uses they, them pronouns. So you're going to hear me use those pronouns talking about them. I realized quite quickly that this led to a bunch of conversations before we even got to talking about the book, right? I noticed that people that I kind of would have expected to just say, oh, great, okay, tell me more about the book, they didn't, right? So they would maybe have questions about that. How does that work? Maybe they were open about that. Maybe they would kind of say, yeah, I get why people should be able to identify however they want, but it just doesn't make sense to me to use a plural pronoun for one person. And so we'd get into some conversations. Sometimes those conversations got heated. Sometimes people would accept that, but they would not use they, them pronouns when they talked about Tiffany. They just kept going back to using she, her pronouns, even though I already told them that's how Tiffany identified. Sometimes people would use they, them pronouns, but they'd do this sort of extra meta communication about it. They'd sort of pause a little before they did it, or they'd do some sort of eye roll or a little inflection in their voice, as if they were kind of implicitly communicating, like, I know this is not normal. And all those conversations were really interesting. There were very few where people just said, okay, cool, and used those pronouns correctly. So it was kind of fascinating because I didn't necessarily expect that. I expected people might struggle sometimes, right? I struggled sometimes. It didn't necessarily roll off the tongue for me at first until I got used to it. And so I started wondering, like, is this just kind of too hard for people? What's going on here? Okay, back to the swim banquet. What blew me away with the way the coaches were giving out the final two awards were that they wanted to keep the person that was going to get the award a complete surprise until they said the name as the very last thing. They even wanted to keep the gender of the person a surprise. And so the coaches were saying stuff like, This award is going to go to the person who was the fastest, 50-meter freestyler. They were always such a pleasure to have around the pool. They always helped out the little kids. They were the fastest in this race and that race. And they were using they, them pronouns to talk about a single person perfectly, easily. They had no challenges with it. Right. And so that got me realizing that maybe what we've got going on here with people's struggles is not a grammar problem. It's not a can our brain do this kind of problem. It's more of a problem related to gender and worldview. And should we be doing this? And so I want to talk about that because I know in all the workshops that I do, in the keynote talks that I do, I know people have a lot of questions about pronouns. A lot of people don't quite understand what it means to use they, them pronouns. A lot of people don't even quite understand how it fits into LGBTQIA plus identity at all, right? Sometimes people don't even know what those letters mean when I say LGBTQIA. That is the subject for another podcast. This one, I really want to focus on pronouns. Now, they, them, right, is the most common gender neutral pronoun. So what that means is maybe somebody doesn't feel male or female. They just feel like a person. Or maybe they feel sometimes male, sometimes female. Maybe they feel both at the same time. All right. So this is a gender neutral way that you would like people to refer to you because that's how you feel. All right. So why does this matter for organizations? This is part of creating that culture of inclusion where all people feel valued, where all people feel respected and seen. And this kind of thing really matters. And it's really common, especially for younger generations. There's research showing that in high schools with this young generation, 25% of people are identifying as LGBTQIA+. Okay, that doesn't mean they're all using they, them pronouns, but a lot are. It doesn't also mean that sometimes people aren't using a mix of pronouns, she, her, or they, them. That happens as well. So anyways, if you have a large organization, you've got people using those pronouns. And in order to make them feel seen, we've got to figure out how to use them in a way that is not making people uncomfortable. It is building it into the culture and just using those pronouns like they're normal and natural because they are. So here are some quick tips. First, and these are kind of individual tips. If you're going to use they, them pronouns, just do it naturally and normally, just like you would with any other pronoun. Anything else, any sort of eye rolling or pausing or change of the tone of your voice is signaling something that would not be wanted. Something like, well, I'll say this, but I don't agree with it, or this is making me uncomfortable, or this is not normal. Don't do that. Okay, there's no need to do it. Don't do it. If you need inspiration, maybe you've seen the show Billions. It's a TV show on Showtime. And there is a character, one of the main characters, who uses they, them pronouns. And I love the way the show just does it and doesn't comment even on it very much. They just use the pronouns. They show everyone using the pronouns. It's great. If you need an example of how to do it, take a look at that show. Now, if you're worried that you're going to use they, them pronouns because you know a person identifies like that, but you're worried that the person you're talking to isn't going to get it, like isn't going to know that you're not talking about a group of people or plural, you just give them a little context, like I did when I talked about Tiffany. Hey, when I mention this person, I'm going to be using they, them pronouns because that's how they identify. And then continue on with what you're saying. If people are trying to tell you it doesn't make sense grammatically, You can tell them, right? You can talk about my swim banquet example. You can tell them that it is in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, a definition of they as a gender non-binary pronoun. And you can tell them that Merriam-Webster notes that this way of using they, them in a singular form has been around since the 1300s, okay? This is not necessarily new. Now, also, even if you don't identify using they, them pronouns, right, you can still speak up when someone gets it wrong about someone else. Okay, that's just good allyship behavior. They're not talking about you, right? Just like if someone was talking about Tiffany to me and they weren't using they, them pronouns, I would just remind them, right? Also, if you find yourself uncomfortable because you're really struggling with this worldview, maybe because of religion or other reasons, you're really struggling with what that means, you can still call people what they want to be called. That's just kindness. It doesn't have to match your worldview. Okay? Accepting people, calling them what they want to be called. You would do that if they had a name and then they gave you a nickname that they preferred. You would use that. Okay? So just use this pronoun, and it makes people feel like you see them and you value them. And then you can do some work about your own discomfort. Also, these pronouns are really meaningful for people. They have thought long and hard about it, and it matters deeply to them. There is no place for debating with them about it, playing devil's advocate. There's no place for that, right? Just accept, okay? And also recognize you're gonna mess up. Right? It's not about being perfect all the time. You just commit to trying, to working on that muscle. You'll get better at it if you do it. I promise. When you mess up, just get it right and move on. Don't overly apologize. What happens when you overly apologize? Well, then you make that person have to take care of you. Right? So just get it right and move on. Now, you're going to notice if you're not familiar with this kind of thing, you're going to notice that people are using pronouns on their email signatures. You're going to notice that they're using them on their Zoom or their Teams handles, when they introduce themselves sometimes. This is a really great practice. Even if people don't mess up your pronouns, right? Like me, if you're watching this video, you can see what I look like. People never get my gender pronouns wrong. I look male, I identify as male, I use he, him pronouns. Nobody gets it wrong, right? But I still put them on my email signature, on my Zoom handles. Why do I do that? It takes the stigma out of it, right? It makes it just a practice that we all do. And then if you're someone who people do get your pronouns wrong for whatever reason, it doesn't feel like extra pressure, like you're being put on the spot, like you're asking people to do something that's a burden, right? To pay attention to your pronouns. It just normalizes the whole practice, and it's really good ally behavior, even if it's not something that affects you personally. So, if you are looking for something you can practice or do this week, there's one thing that I recommend is start using your pronouns if you're not already. Put it on your email signature. Put it in your name when you log on to a Zoom or Teams call, right? Introduce yourself using the pronouns. You can just say, hey, my name is Michael, identify with he, him pronouns, and then whatever other introduction you want to give. So that's one action you could take this week that I think would be really helpful. What else? Notice other people doing it. Right? Look out for they, them gender pronouns if people are using them. They're not the only version of a gender neutral pronoun. It's just the most common. Okay, Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great week.